You ever come home from a 12-hour shift only to find out your house, your literal house, has been sold?
Yeah.
That happened to me. I'm Tanner Nells, 20-year real estate broker, licensed statewide, and I've dealt with every scam, swindle, and sleazebag in the property world. But none of that prepared me for Claudia Zimmer, the HOA president from hell, who decided to auction off my place without even telling me. Over a measly $600 fee I never even owed. I live in a quiet cul-de-sac in a mid-tier neighborhood outside of Phoenix. I bought that house outright 10 years ago.
No mortgage.
No missed payments.
No liens.
Just peace, coffee on the porch, and the occasional neighborhood barbecue. Until Claudia took over the HOA. Claudia Zimmer was the kind of woman who wore tennis skirts even though she hadn't picked up a racket in years. She had that sharp, nasal voice that could slice through drywall, and she ran the HOA like a private dictatorship. You couldn't plant flowers without her approval. I once watched her measure a neighbor's grass with a tape measure.
Twice.
I mostly ignored her. I paid the quarterly dues on time, didn't cause issues, didn't attend meetings. That's probably why she targeted me when things went down. It started 3 months ago. I got a letter. Not certified. Not anything official, just a folded piece of paper shoved in my mailbox with the HOA letterhead on it. It said I owed $600 in compliance penalties. The letter made 0 sense. It referenced landscaping violations I'd never heard of and a fence height discrepancy. That was laughable. I'd built that fence to code, with HOA approval, and had the signed documents to prove it. So I ignored it. Then came another letter. This one said if I didn't pay, they'd place a lien on my property. I called the HOA office, just a small converted room inside our clubhouse, and got Claudia herself. "Tanner," she said, in that voice that made my jaw clench. "You've been non-compliant for months. The board voted. This is standard procedure." "What board?" "Claudia, that fence was approved. I have the paperwork." "Well, the board re-evaluated the standards. And your landscaping is chaotic. We can't have that in this community." I looked out my front window. My lawn was mowed. My hedges were trimmed. Not a weed in sight. "Claudia," I said, "this is harassment. I'm not paying." "You'll regret that," she said, and hung up. That was the last I heard until I came home one Tuesday evening and saw a moving truck in my driveway. 2 guys were hauling boxes out of my front door. I slammed the brakes, jumped out of my truck, and yelled, "What the hell are you doing?" One of them looked confused. "We're moving in the new owners?" My stomach dropped. I shoved past them and stormed into my own house. Everything was boxed up. My furniture, my photos, my life. Standing by the kitchen island, clipboard in hand, and with the most punchable grin I've ever seen, was Claudia Zimmer. "Oh, Tanner," she said, fake surprised. "You're home early. What the hell did you do?" "I followed protocol," she said, like she was some bureaucratic saint. "You ignored notices for months. The HOA foreclosed on your property. It went to auction. It's sold." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "You can't just sell someone's house." "I can. And I did." "You're out of your mind. I own this place. No mortgage. No bank can foreclose." She clicked her pen.
True.
"But under Arizona law, an HOA can foreclose on a property for unpaid fees and penalties. We followed the lien process." "You faked those penalties. You had no right." She shrugged. "You should have paid. It's not my fault you don't take your responsibilities seriously." I was shaking. I pulled out my phone. "You're going to regret this." Her eyes narrowed. "You threatening me?" "No," I said. "I'm going to bury you legally." And I meant it. I didn't sleep that night. I crashed at a buddy's place, but I spent the entire night going through every HOA document I'd ever received. Claudia was sloppy. She never sent certified mail. No signature confirmations. No proper notices of lien. And she never filed anything with the county recorder's office. I checked. The next morning, I went to the county recorder's office myself. No lien had ever been officially recorded. That made everything she'd done illegal. But I wasn't done. I pulled up the auction records. The so-called buyer? A company registered under Zimmer Property Holdings, LLC. I nearly laughed. Claudia had sold my house to her own shell company. She tried to steal my home and resell it for a profit. She messed with the wrong guy. I brushed off my old briefcase, called up my real estate attorney friend, and got to work. 2 days later, I filed an emergency motion with the court to halt the transfer of ownership and reclaim possession. I submitted every document, every fake penalty notice, my proof of payment history, my fence approval forms, and the lack of any properly recorded lien. The judge granted a temporary injunction within hours. I walked into my house that afternoon with a copy of the order in hand and handed it to the movers. They backed off immediately. Claudia was there again, of course, trying to play innocent. "You can't just barge in here," she said, glaring like a raccoon caught in a trash can. I handed her the court order. "This says otherwise. You illegally foreclosed, sold it to your own company, and never filed a real lien. You're cooked." Her face paled. "You don't understand the complexities, Claudia," I said, stepping forward. "I've been a licensed real estate broker for 20 years. I know every law you just broke. And I keep records. Every single one." She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. "Get out of my house." She left. But I wasn't done. The next day, I filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, the Attorney General's Office, and the State HOA Oversight Board. I submitted everything: her fake notices, her LLC connection, the lack of certified mailing, and how she tried to profit from it. And then I did something I knew would really twist the knife. I called an emergency HOA meeting. And this time I showed up. The clubhouse smelled like lemon-scented floor polish and oversteeped coffee. Beige walls, beige chairs, and a fan that hummed like it was on its last leg. I hadn't set foot in there since the annual barbecue sign-up sheet got turned into a battleground over hot dog brands. But this time, I wasn't there for small talk. I stood at the front of the room, court order in hand, watching neighbors trickle in with puzzled looks. A dozen people filled the plastic chairs. Mr. Coleman from 2 doors down, always in his fishing vest, the Alvarado family, clutching their toddler, even quiet old Mrs. Brenner, who never left her porch unless threatened by weather or revolution. Claudia strutted in 5 minutes late, lips pursed, clipboard in hand. "Let's begin," she said, trying to slide into her usual position at the head table. I stepped in front of her. "This is a special session," I said, raising my voice just enough to carry. "Per HOA bylaws, any homeowner can request one with 48 hours notice, and I gave mine in writing. So I'll be leading tonight." She let out a short, dry laugh. "You're not on the board." "No, but I'm still the legal owner of my property, which makes me a voting member of this association. As of yesterday, the court halted the fraudulent transfer of my home. And we're going to talk about that." The room went quiet. People shifted in their seats. Claudia's eyes narrowed. "This isn't the appropriate forum for legal disputes." I met her gaze without blinking. "You made it the appropriate forum when you used this HOA to push an illegal foreclosure through and sold my house to your own shell company." A murmur spread through the room. "Let's go back to the beginning," I continued. 3 months ago, Claudia sent me a notice claiming I owed $600 in penalties. No explanation, no evidence, no prior warning. That alone violates our own CC and RS. "Those penalties were valid," she snapped. "The board approved them." "Really?" I turned to the room. "Who here was part of that board vote?" Blank stares. A few people shook their heads. I pointed to a printed sheet of our HOA's board members' 5 names. all neighbors. According to our records, the board is supposed to include diverse homeowners from around the block. But Claudia replaced 2 members last year without a community vote. They resigned suddenly. No one here remembers voting on replacements, do they? No hands went up. Because she replaced them with people tied to her real estate company, I said. Ones who never show up to meetings. Ones who rubber stamp anything she sends through. Claudia's voice cracked slightly. That's not true. They were appointed per bylaw subsection 7. Subsection 7 requires community ratification within 30 days. You never held a vote. I pulled out the HOA meeting minutes from the past 5 months. These are typed summaries. No signatures. No attendance logs. No audio recordings. Just your word. That's not transparency. That's fiction. Mrs. Brenner leaned forward. Wait, are you saying she's been making up board decisions? I'm saying she's been signing off on penalties and rules without actual board votes, and then using those fake penalties to justify seizing property. Mr. Coleman stood up slowly. That can't be legal.
It's not, I said.
And it gets worse. I handed out copies of the property auction documents, highlighting the buyer, Zimmer Property Holdings, LLC. That's her company, I said. Registered under her sister's name, but the business address is her own. She sold my house to herself through a sham auction without even filing a legal lien. She never recorded it with the county. That's mortgage fraud, property fraud, and abuse of fiduciary duty. My attorney filed a formal complaint with the Attorney General's office, and the Department of Real Estate opened an investigation yesterday. Claudia looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. You can't prove intent, she said, voice rising. It was a mistake, maybe, but intent. I held up one last document. This is an email from her to a private real estate investor discussing flipping my property for a projected $70,000 profit. She sent it last month. I subpoenaed it through my lawyer. The room erupted. The Alvarado dad stood up and asked how many other homes had been targeted. Mrs. Brenner muttered something about her late fees doubling out of nowhere last winter. Claudia tried to talk over them, but the outrage drowned her out. I want her removed, someone shouted. Can we vote her out right now? Another said. Claudia tried to bolt, but I stepped in her path.
There's one more thing, I said.
The police are involved now. That got everyone's attention. Claudia froze. When I showed them the forged notices, the fake auction, and the LLC connection, they opened a fraud case. 2 officers came by this morning to collect statements. This isn't just a civil matter anymore. This is criminal. Claudia's voice dropped to a whisper. You're ruining my life over a misunderstanding. No, I said. You tried to steal a man's home. You used your position to run a racket. You ruined your own life. The board voted on the spot. Claudia was removed as president in less than 5 minutes. Her name was stripped from every office record, and a motion passed to suspend all penalty collections until a full audit could be done with an independent third party. But the best part? That came 2 days later when I was sitting on my front porch, sipping strong coffee and watching the sunrise. A black sedan pulled up. 2 plainclothes detectives stepped out, walked up to Claudia's house across the street, and knocked. She answered in a robe and slippers. They didn't even raise their voices. Just presented a badge, handed her a warrant, and stepped inside. 15 minutes later, they walked her out in cuffs. The neighborhood stood still. Mr. Coleman looked up from trimming his hedges, eyes wide. Mrs. Brenner stood on her porch with a hand over her mouth. Even the Alvarado toddler pointed and asked something in Spanish that made his mom laugh nervously. Claudia didn't say a word.
She didn't have to.
The moment the car doors shut, a strange kind of peace settled over the block. Like the air finally had room to breathe again. I spent the next week helping the interim HOA board sort through records. We found 4 other properties that had been slapped with similar fake penalties. One couple had already paid over $2,000 in compliance fees that had no basis in the CC and RS. We got them refunded. Every document Claudia had touched was being audited by a third-party legal team. And me? I got my house back. The court ruling finalized the reversal of the fake sale, and the title was restored in full. No damage, no missing items, just a lingering smell of cardboard from the moving boxes she'd packed without my consent. But I wasn't done yet. I filed a civil suit for fraud, emotional distress, and unlawful seizure of property. My attorneys said we had a strong case. Strong enough to not just win damages, but to ensure Claudia never held a real estate license, HOA seat, or management position again. Because people like her count on the silence. They count on homeowners not knowing their rights, on people being too tired, too busy, or too intimidated to fight back. But I had something she didn't expect. Experience. Receipts. And the cold, steady patience of someone who's seen every dirty trick in the book and knows exactly how to shut it down. 3 weeks after Claudia Zimmer was escorted out of her house in handcuffs, the neighborhood had begun to breathe again. But peace didn't mean stillness. Not for me. Not when I had a civil suit marching steadily toward court and a growing pile of documents that painted a picture far worse than even I had imagined. I'd originally thought I was just one unlucky target, but once the interim board started digging, things unraveled fast. Financial records were a mess. Entire spreadsheets were missing. Dozens of transactions had been logged under vague categories like community enhancement and emergency compliance fund, but no one could explain what those terms actually meant. And when we requested access to the HOA's bank account statements, we hit a wall. The account had been drained. Not empty, but less than $400 remained. For an HOA that collected over $90,000 annually from dues alone, that was a red flag the size of a billboard. I stood in the temporary boardroom, formerly the rec room, now cleared of ping-pong tables and yoga mats, with 2 other members of the new board and my attorney, Evelyn Tran. She was sharp, fast-talking, and had a knack for finding the weak spot in any defense. They're going to claim it was allocated for maintenance and repairs, she said, flipping through a file. But there's no contractor paperwork.
No invoices. No permits.
That money didn't go to fixing sidewalks. They'll say it was cash payments, I said. Which would be illegal, she replied, tapping a page. HOAs are required to maintain transparent financial records. Every major expenditure needs to be documented and approved by the board. This wasn't. Cheryl, one of the new board members, leaned forward. We found a withdrawal for $15,000 labeled vendor reimbursement, but the vendor doesn't exist. I checked the tax ID. It's fake. Evelyn closed the file. This isn't just bad bookkeeping. This is embezzlement. That afternoon, we handed everything over to the Financial Crimes Unit at the county sheriff's office. They asked for sworn statements, then requested a forensic audit. Claudia Zimmer wasn't just guilty of trying to steal a house. She'd been bleeding the HOA dry for at least 2 years. The next day, a detective named Ray Delgado called me directly. She made transfers to 3 different accounts, he said. 2 in her name, 1 in her sister's. And we found cash deposits into a separate LLC that doesn't list any business activity. That's textbook laundering. Can you charge her? We're preparing an indictment, he said. But we need one more thing: confirmation that she forged signatures on the penalty notices. Can you prove it? I already pulled them, I said. The board members she claimed approved them? One moved to Nevada last year. The other died 6 months ago. There was a pause on the line. Yeah, he said. That'll do it. By the end of the week, Claudia was facing 4 felony counts: fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and racketeering. Her sister, who had tried to play innocent through the entire investigation, was now under scrutiny for aiding and abetting. But while the legal side gained momentum, I had a different war to fight: rebuilding the community's trust. The HOA had become a punchline. People were angry, confused, and suddenly aware that they'd been living under a regime that had turned neighborly oversight into a personal ATM. I called for a town hall, not a typical HOA meeting, but a full, open forum where every homeowner could speak without time limits or procedural nonsense. That Friday night, more than 60 people packed into the clubhouse. Folding chairs lined the walls. Some folks stood in the back. You could feel the tension in the air, not the kind that comes before a fight, but the kind that comes when people are finally allowed to ask the questions they've been holding in for too long. I stood at the front, not as a board member, not as a plaintiff, but just a homeowner who'd had enough. Claudia Zimmer is gone, I said. She's facing criminal charges. But that doesn't mean the problem's left with her. We've got to rebuild this place from the ground up. A hand went up in the back. What happened to the money? We're still tracing it, I said. A forensic audit is underway. But we know most of it was siphoned into private accounts. We're working with the county to recover what we can. Another voice called out. How did she get away with it for so long? She controlled the records, I replied. She blocked access, appointed fake board members, and forged documents when necessary. She counted on people not paying attention. A middle-aged man near the door stood up, arms crossed. So what now? We just trust the next board not to do the same thing. No, I said. You don't trust. You verify. From here on out, every meeting will be recorded and posted online. All financial records will be made available by request. No decisions without a vote. And no more hidden penalties. Ever. A slow ripple of nods spread through the room. We'll also introduce term limits, I continued. No one serves more than 2 consecutive years. And every board member has to sign a conflict of interest disclosure. That includes me. It wasn't applause that followed. It was something quieter, but more powerful agreement. Relief. Determination. After the meeting, people lingered. For the first time in years, neighbors actually talked to each other. Not about lawn heights or garbage bins, but about what they wanted the neighborhood to be. A retired accountant offered to help with the audit. A college student volunteered to build a website for the HOA. The Alvarado family said they'd host the next community cookout. Claudia had ruled through fear and confusion. But now, the community was bonding through restoration. 2 weeks later, the audit revealed the full scope of the damage. Over $80,000 had been misappropriated. More than half of that had been funneled into Zimmer Property Holdings and a second shell company registered in New Mexico under a false name. Claudia had paid herself consulting fees, reimbursed herself for travel, and even used HOA funds to pay the property taxes on a rental she owned 2 towns over. When the DA's office filed its final charges, the list hit 9 felonies and 2 misdemeanors. Her trial was set for the fall. The judge denied bail, citing risk of flight. But justice wasn't just about Claudia. It was about the people she hurt. I personally helped file refund claims for 5 families who had paid illegitimate fines. The board voted unanimously to return those funds using recovered assets as soon as the court released them. We also voted to dissolve all current HOA rules and rewrite the bylaws from scratch this time, with attorneys, residents, and transparency at the core. The neighborhood had changed. And it wasn't just the policies or the meetings. It was the way people looked at each other. There was less suspicion, more conversation. One morning, I found a handwritten note on my doorstep. It said, "Thank you for giving us our neighborhood back." I didn't know who wrote it, and I didn't need to, because in the end, that was the real win. Not the court orders, not the headlines, not even watching Claudia get walked out in cuffs. It was knowing that when someone tried to weaponize power and steal what didn't belong to them, good people stood up, fought back, and rebuilt something better in its place. And this time, we weren't going to let anyone tear it down again. The trial of Claudia Zimmer began on a sweltering Monday in early September. The kind of day where the heat settles into your skin and makes it feel like the world's leaning a little closer than usual. I sat in the second row of the Maricopa County Superior Court, pressed between Evelyn Tran and Cheryl from the newly restructured HOA board, both of them thumbing neatly stacked folders of evidence, testimonies, bank records. I didn't bring anything.
I didn't need to.
Everything I'd done came down to this. Claudia shuffled in wearing a gray jumpsuit and a blank expression that didn't quite match the woman who once barked orders about mailbox colors like they were matters of national security. Her hair was flat, her eyes dull. The courtroom murmured as she was escorted to the defense table. No lawyer beside her yet. The public defender assigned to her had filed a motion to withdraw the week before. Apparently, Claudia had refused every deal offered and insisted on representing herself. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with a voice like gravel, called the court to order. The prosecution began by laying out the charges: wire fraud, forgery, criminal racketeering, and misuse of fiduciary funds. But what landed hardest was the last one: unlawful seizure and sale of residential property under false pretenses. That charge had my name on it. The state's attorney, a lean man named Marlowe, approached the witness stand that afternoon and called his first witness, me. I stepped up, placed my hand on the Bible, and took the oath. Then I looked Claudia straight in the face as I sat down. Mr. Nells, Marlowe began, you've been a licensed real estate broker in Arizona for how long? 20 years, I said. And in that time, have you ever seen an HOA attempt to foreclose on a property without filing a lien with the county recorder's office?
Never.
It's not just improper, it's illegal. And in your case, was any such lien ever filed? No, he turned to the jury. So, what happened next? I walked them through it: the fake notices, the forged board approvals, the auction to her shell company. I explained how she used the HOA's authority to create debt out of thin air and then used that fake debt to justify seizing my home. And did you have any indication that she had done this to others? I nodded. After I went public, we found 4 more homeowners with similar fake penalty notices. One elderly couple had paid over $6,000 in compliance escalations tied to a non-existent drainage code. Marlowe handed me a printed email. Can you identify this? I looked down. It was the same one we'd pulled from her sent mailbox, the one where she promised a private investor a $70,000 flip. That's from Claudia, I said. She sent it 2 weeks before trying to move me out of my home. The judge leaned forward slightly. Mr. Nells, to your knowledge, did the HOA members ever vote on or approve the penalties cited against you?
No.
In fact, 2 of the board members whose names she used hadn't even lived in the state for months. One was deceased. That hit the room like a dropped anchor. I could feel the jurors shift. The bailiff's jaw clenched. When I stepped down, Claudia finally rose to speak. She'd scribbled notes on loose leaf paper, her hands shaking slightly as she walked to the podium. These are exaggerated claims, she began. I was trying to maintain order in a community that had no discipline. I was under pressure. The bylaws gave me discretionary authority. The judge cut in. Ms. Zimmer, are you denying that you created and signed penalty notices using deceased or out-of-state board members? I made administrative assumptions based on prior votes. No, the judge said, eyes hard. You forged signatures. Claudia's voice faltered. I had no malicious intent. I was trying to protect property values. Marlowe stood. Your Honor, intent is not exoneration when the defendant benefits personally from illegal actions. She profited. She deceived. She stole. Claudia didn't speak again for the remainder of the day. By the time the trial reached the 3rd day, the forensic accountant had testified. The jury heard how over $80,000 had been funneled into shell entities, how falsified vendor payments were made to non-existent maintenance companies, and how HOA funds were used to pay for Claudia's private property taxes, a personal vehicle, and a cosmetic surgery clinic in Scottsdale. But the most damning moment came when a former HOA secretary, a woman named Elise who'd quit 18 months prior, took the stand. She told me to backdate penalty letters, Elise said, voice trembling. She said no one checks. That people were too lazy to read the bylaws. Did you comply? At first, I didn't know what I was looking at. But then she forged a board member's signature in front of me. That's when I left. Why didn't you report it then? Elise looked down. I was scared. She threatened to sue me if I talked. The courtroom went silent. The judge leaned back, then looked to the defense table. Claudia didn't move. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes on the floor. The jury didn't take long. After 4 days of testimony and evidence, they returned a unanimous verdict after less than 2 hours of deliberation, guilty on all counts. When the judge read the sentence, 12 years with no possibility of parole for the first 8, Claudia didn't flinch. But I noticed her left hand twitch slightly, the way someone might if they were trying very hard not to scream. The courtroom emptied slowly, whispering and murmuring, but I stayed seated for a long moment, letting it settle. The fight was over. Not just for me, but for the entire neighborhood. Outside, the air had cooled. It smelled faintly of creosote, like the desert was catching its breath after a long, hard summer. Cheryl joined me on the courthouse steps, holding a stack of signed judge's orders. She's not coming back, she said.
No, I said.
She's not. We walked back to our cars in silence. That weekend, the neighborhood held its first community event under the new HOA charter. No fees, no requirements, just a potluck and a few folding tables in the common green. Someone brought a speaker and played old rock songs from the 60s. Kids rode bikes down the street without being chased down for not wearing reflective vests. I showed up late. When I did, someone had already set a chair aside for me. A woman I didn't know, short, gray-haired, wearing a denim jacket with iron-on patches, handed me a paper plate with some kind of casserole. She didn't ask who I was, just said, "Glad you're here." I sat down, took a bite, and for the first time in months, tasted something that wasn't coated in stress or strategy.
Peace.
Justice didn't bring back the time I lost or the panic I'd endured, but it brought resolution. And it brought something else, too, a neighborhood that finally belonged to its people again. No fear.
No forged signatures.
No self-appointed tyrants with clipboards. Just neighbors. And I could live with that.